They tied up the Apache girl and dragged her for 10 days, until a cowboy showed up. The sun was just beginning to rise over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Apache village lay quietly in the early morning light, the smoke from small cooking fires rising gently into the air. In one small hut, a young girl named Naeli awoke to the sound of birds singing. She stretched her arms and yawned, her dark hair falling across her shoulders. Life in the village was simple, yet beautiful. Naeli loved helping her mother gather herbs, watching the older children play, and listening to the elders' stories about their ancestors and the spirits of the land. She walked outside, feeling the cool breeze on her face. The desert around the village stretched far and wide, full of hidden trails, rocky hills, and winding rivers. Naeli often wandered a little distance to explore, though she always stayed close enough to hear the familiar sounds of home. She loved feeling the wind on her skin, the sun on her face, and the soft earth beneath her feet. That morning, the village seemed peaceful. Farmers were already tending to their crops, and a few hunters returned with small game for the families. Naeli's mother called her over to help with the chores. She carried water from the nearby stream, swept the area around the huts, and helped prepare breakfast. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal, as if the day had been perfectly painted by nature. But deep in the shadows, among the hills just beyond the village, a small band of outlaws was hiding. They had been watching for days, waiting for the perfect moment. They were cruel men, greedy and reckless, who took whatever they wanted without thought for the people they harmed. The Apache village had no soldiers or guards to protect it, and the outlaws knew it. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation as they whispered among themselves, plotting how they would strike. Naeli had no idea she was being watched. She laughed and ran toward the stream to fetch more water, humming a song her mother had taught her. The day felt ordinary, yet the danger was closer than she could ever imagine. As she bent down to scoop water from the clear, flowing stream, she noticed movement in the corner of her eye. A shadow slipped between the rocks, disappearing as quickly as it came. Her heart skipped a beat, but she thought it was just a trick of the light. By mid-morning, the outlaws had crept closer to the village, moving quietly so no one would notice. They waited until the sun was high, when most of the villagers were busy with work and the elders were distracted by their daily tasks. Then, without warning, they struck. The first sounds were shouts and the crashing of huts. Naeli froze, her heart racing, as she saw men appear out of nowhere, armed with ropes and clubs. Panic spread through the village like wildfire. Mothers grabbed their children, shouting for them to hide. Hunters tried to fight, but the outlaws were too strong and too quick. Naeli's father grabbed a spear and ran toward the attackers, but one of the men knocked him down, and he could do nothing to stop them. Naeli ran toward her mother, but before she could reach her, a strong hand grabbed her shoulder and twisted it sharply. She screamed, struggling to get free, but another hand grabbed her ankle. She fell to the ground, her small body no match for the men. They tied her hands tightly behind her back with rough rope, cutting into her skin. She struggled, but it was useless. One of the outlaws lifted her roughly, dragging her toward the waiting horses. Her mother's voice rang in her ears, calling her name, begging the attackers to stop. Naeli's eyes filled with tears as she looked back at the village, the place that had always been her home. She saw her friends and family running, trying to save what they could, but she was already being taken away. Fear and anger mixed in her chest, making her heart beat thunder. She didn't understand why this was happening, why anyone could be so cruel. The outlaws did not speak kindly. They mocked her cries and laughed at the villagers' despair. Naeli tried to shout, to tell her mother she loved her, but the ropes around her hands made it impossible. She kicked at the men, but they only tightened their grip and dragged her faster. The dust rose around them as they moved through the desert, the hot sun beating down on Naeli's back. She could feel the rope chafing her wrists, the rough sand scratching her skin, and the exhaustion beginning to take hold. As they traveled, Nayeli tried to remember the lessons her mother had taught her. She remembered the small tricks her grandmother had shown her for escaping traps, the careful observation of the land, and the quiet patience needed to survive. Her mind raced, thinking of ways she could free herself, but the men were too strong, and she was still young and weak. She had to wait, she told herself, and watch for any opportunity. The outlaws argued among themselves, speaking loudly now that they were far from the village. Nayeli listened closely, trying to learn what she could. They spoke of taking her to a distant town, selling her for gold, and then disappearing into the hills. Their greed was their weakness, she realized. They underestimated her because she was just a girl. That thought gave her a small spark of hope. She would not give up. The desert was harsh and the journey was brutal. They moved through rocky paths, over hills, and across rivers. Nayeli's body ached, her skin burned from the sun, and her throat was parched. Yet she refused to cry out too loudly, knowing that her struggle could anger the men and make her suffer even more. She focused on breathing steadily, thinking of her family, and imagining the day she would return home. At night, they stopped to rest. Nayeli was tied to a tree, unable to move. The outlaws slept around the fire, their shadows flickering in the orange glow. She listened to the sounds of the night, the wind whispering through the trees, the distant howl of a coyote, and tried to calm herself. She whispered prayers quietly to herself, asking for courage, strength, and a chance to escape. She remembered the stories her grandfather had told her about brave ancestors who had faced impossible challenges and had survived. Their courage inspired her now. Even in captivity, Nayeli's mind remained sharp. She studied the men while they slept, noticing how they moved, how they kept watch, and what distracted them. She practiced quietly twisting her hands, testing the ropes, feeling the strength in her fingers. She imagined herself running, free and fast, across the desert, and the thought gave her a surge of energy. She knew she had to survive, not just for herself but for her family who must be searching desperately for her. The days began to blur together. The sun rose and fell, the outlaws moved them farther from the village, and Nayeli endured. She was exhausted, hungry and sore, but she refused to give up hope. Each day, she learned a little more about the land, the men, and herself. She realized that her strength was more than her body. It was her mind, her courage, and her heart. Even in the worst moments, she held on to the belief that something good could still happen, that someone might come to help her, or that she might find a way to escape on her own. As the first part of her journey ended, Nayeli looked up at the horizon, the mountains far ahead, and whispered to herself, "I will not be broken. I will survive." The wind carried her words, almost as if the land itself was listening, giving her courage for the trials that were yet to come. The young Apache girl had been captured, dragged from her home and forced into a terrifying journey, but inside her, a fire had begun to burn, a fire of hope, courage, and the will to survive against all odds. The desert stretched endlessly before Nayeli, a vast expanse of sand, rocks, and sparse vegetation. The outlaws moved with deliberate speed, determined to reach their destination, unaware that every step tested the young girl's endurance. Each morning, the sun blazed overhead, scorching her back as she trudged through the rough terrain. Her hands were raw from the ropes, and her feet, though covered in thin moccasins, were swollen and blistered from the harsh ground. Yet Nayeli did not cry out. She endured in silence, her mind focused on survival and the hope of returning home. Water was scarce, and each drop was precious. The outlaws carried small flasks, rarely offering her any. Nayeli had learned to cup her hands at the rare streams they crossed and to drink cautiously, conserving every bit of liquid. She felt the heat of the sun during the day and the chill of the nights as they slept beneath the open sky. Sometimes, she shivered under the stars, tying herself as tightly as the ropes allowed to conserve warmth. She whispered to herself stories of brave ancestors, finding strength in their courage, imagining herself as a small but determined warrior. The journey was not easy. They climbed steep hills where loose stones threatened to tumble underfoot, crossed narrow paths along cliffs, and forded shallow rivers that left her clothes soaked and chilled. Naomi's body ached constantly, her muscles cramped, and her joints stiffened with each step. Yet even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she refused to give in. She began to observe the men more closely, noting the patterns in their movements, the times they rested, and their distracted moments. The outlaws spoke amongst themselves constantly, though mostly in low voices so they would not alert her to every plan. They argued over directions, gold, and the best way to sell their captive. Naomi listened with sharp ears, learning which men were cruelest, which were careless, and which were slightly more cautious. In their arrogance, they revealed weaknesses, tiny cracks in their coordination that she would one day use to her advantage. During the first few days, Naomi tried to free herself several times. She twisted against the ropes, rubbed her wrists along the rough bark of trees, and even attempted to bite through the bindings, but the ropes were too thick. Every failure left her tired and in pain, but she refused to lose hope. She realized that survival was not just about strength. It was about patience, observation, and waiting for the right moment. One evening, as the group stopped near a small hill, the outlaws built a fire and ate the little food they carried. Naomi was left tied to a low branch, unable to move. Her stomach growled from hunger, and the aroma of roasted meat filled the air, but she did not complain. She focused on the small comforts she could find, the warmth of the fire on her frozen toes, the soft crackling of wood, and the faint twinkling of stars above. Naomi also began to observe the natural world more carefully. She noticed patterns in the wind, the sounds of distant animals, and the shapes of the hills. She remembered lessons her mother had taught her about reading the land. Rocks could provide leverage, branches could be broken for tools, and the sounds of the desert could signal approaching danger or opportunity. Every detail became a potential advantage, every moment a chance to learn and survive. By the fourth day, the harsh reality of the journey began to take its toll. Her feet were raw, her body ached from the long marches, and her skin was sunburned and dusty. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, and thirst made her throat feel raw. The outlaws offered her scraps occasionally, but it was never enough. Still, she refused to cry or beg. Naomi knew that showing weakness could provoke cruelty. She learned to endure silently, conserving her energy and focusing on the things she could control: her thoughts, her breathing, and her small acts of preparation. At night, she tried to rest, but sleep was difficult. The ropes dug into her skin, and the men's loud conversations often kept her awake. She lay under the open sky, staring at the stars, and imagined herself running free, returning to the village she loved. She whispered encouragements to herself. "You are strong. You are clever. You will survive." The desert wind carried her words, almost as if it was listening, supporting her quietly. The journey also revealed moments of tension among the outlaws. Arguments became more frequent as hunger, fatigue, and the strain of travel wore them down. Naomi listened carefully, noting which men might be distracted at the right moment. One man was constantly impatient, tapping his foot, glancing around nervously, and often stepping away from the group to relieve himself or scout ahead. Another spoke too loudly in anger, revealing his position and movements. Naomi stored these observations in her mind, silently forming a plan for the future, even though escape was still distant. By the sixth day, the desert seemed endless. Naomi had grown thinner, but her determination had only strengthened. She found small ways to survive, gathering wild berries along the path, filtering muddy water with leaves, and keeping her mind occupied with stories and memories of home. She even began to hum quietly to herself, songs her mother had taught her, keeping her spirits alive and reminding herself of the life she longed to return to. The outlaws, meanwhile, had begun to show signs of exhaustion as well. The long marches, harsh sun, and lack of sufficient food made them irritable and careless. One night, as they set up camp near a dry riverbed, they became distracted by arguments over gold and trade. Naomi noticed a rock close to where she was tied, one that could be used to fray the rope if she could reach it. She traced her hands along the rope, feeling for weakness, imagining how she might slip free if the moment came. By the 8th day, the desert had changed. The hills became sharper and the riverbeds were drier. Hunger and thirst had become constant companions, and exhaustion gnawed at her muscles. Still, Naomi refused to give in. She had become quiet and observant, learning how to anticipate the outlaws' movements and noticing the faint signs of wildlife that could provide small nourishment. Her mind became a tool as sharp as a knife, planning for the day when she might finally be free. During the nights, Naomi often dreamed of home. She imagined her family searching for her, calling her name, and feeling the relief of reunion. These dreams fueled her courage, reminding her that her struggle was not in vain. She also imagined herself running across the desert, barefoot and free, feeling the wind on her face and the warmth of the sun on her back. Each day, these visions grew stronger, guiding her spirit through the pain and hardship. The 9th day arrived with more difficulty than the others. Naomi's body was weak, her skin sunburned, and her muscles screamed with exhaustion. The outlaws had grown reckless, arguing loudly and moving without care. Naomi's small acts of observation became even more crucial. She noticed that one man often left his knife within reach, a careless habit that might one day allow her to cut her bindings. Another man tended to fall asleep near the fire, leaving her ropes within reach of sharp stones. Every detail mattered now, and Naomi's mind was alive with possibilities. Despite her suffering, Naomi refused to despair. She kept her thoughts focused on hope, on survival, and on the life that awaited her. She reminded herself that she was not just a victim. She was a young Apache girl with courage, intelligence, and the will to survive. Each step, no matter how painful, brought her closer to the chance for freedom. On the 10th day, the outlaws were nearing a distant town, unaware that their captive had learned more about survival than they had imagined. Naomi felt both fear and anticipation. She was weak, but her mind was sharp, and her spirit was stronger than ever. She knew that help might come, or that she might find the courage and skill to escape herself. As the sun began to set on that 10th day, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, Naomi held her head high. She whispered to herself, "I will survive. I will not be broken. My journey is not over." And somewhere beyond the distant hills, a lone cowboy rode along the trails of the desert. Unaware of the full story yet, he would soon notice signs that would change everything. The girl's ordeal was far from over, but the first glimmer of hope had arrived, bringing with it the possibility of rescue, freedom, and the courage to face the dangers that lay ahead. The 10th day had arrived, and the harsh desert seemed even more unforgiving than before. Naomi's small body was exhausted from the long journey, her feet swollen and blistered, her arms raw from the ropes that bit into her skin. Her stomach ached from hunger, and her throat burned from thirst. Every step felt heavier than the last, yet she refused to give up. She had survived this long, and she was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. The outlaws, unaware of the strength and intelligence of their captive, grew more careless with each passing hour. They argued constantly, their voices harsh and loud, breaking the rhythm of the journey. One man blamed another for choosing the wrong path, another complained about the weight of their loot. Their greed and anger clouded their judgment, giving Naomi small glimpses of opportunity. She observed everything carefully. The way they carried their weapons, the times they paused to rest, the way their ropes were tied when they stopped. As they moved along a rocky trail, Nayeli's mind raced with possibilities. She noticed a jagged stone lying near where she was tied during their short rest. If she could twist her hands enough, she might be able to rub the rope against it, weakening the fibers slowly. She had no immediate plan, but she held on to this small hope, thinking that patience was her greatest ally. The sun blazed overhead, hotter than it had been the previous days. Nayeli's clothes were damp with sweat, and dust clung to her skin. The outlaws, focused on their destination, barely noticed her suffering. Occasionally, one would throw her a small piece of dry bread or a sip of water, but it was never enough. Hunger gnawed at her, making every step a challenge, but she remembered her mother's words. Strength is not just in your body, it is in your mind and heart. Those words kept her going, giving her courage when her body begged for rest. The desert was quiet except for the crunch of boots on sand and the occasional shout of the men. Birds circled high above, and the distant mountains rose like silent guardians over the land. Nayeli tried to focus on these small details, using them to keep her mind sharp. She noticed tracks of animals nearby, rabbits, lizards, and the occasional coyote, and wondered if she could use the knowledge of the land to aid her escape. Every small observation was a lifeline, every detail a potential key to survival. By midday, the sun reached its peak, and the outlaws stopped near a small grove of trees. They tied Nayeli to a low branch while they rested, eating the little food they had brought and drinking water from a shallow spring. Nayeli's stomach ached, and her throat felt parched, but she waited silently. She had learned that patience was vital. Any wrong move could provoke the men and worsen her situation. She observed the group carefully, noticing one man who had a small knife tucked into his belt. He was careless, placing it within reach of where she was tied. She made a mental note of this, imagining how she could use it if she ever had the chance. The tension among the outlaws grew. Their greed and fatigue made them reckless. One man left his post to fetch more water. Another argued loudly about which path to take, and the others became engrossed in counting coins and supplies. Nayeli's heart beat faster as she realized that opportunity might be closer than she had thought. She began to test the ropes quietly, twisting her hands and feeling for weak spots. Slowly, deliberately, she rubbed her wrists against the rough bark of the tree, chafing the fibers just enough to make them fray. As the day wore on, Nayeli's exhaustion deepened, but so did her resolve. She reminded herself of home, of her family waiting, and of the strength she carried inside. Memories of her mother's gentle hands, her father's proud smile, and the laughter of her friends fueled her courage. She whispered quietly to herself, "I am strong. I will survive. I will be free." The desert wind seemed to answer her, brushing her hair and carrying her words across the barren land. By late afternoon, the outlaws resumed their march. Nayeli's body protested with every step, but her mind remained focused. She noticed patterns in their movements, small habits that revealed carelessness. One man often paused to tie his boot, leaving the rope slack for a moment. Another carried a heavy bag of supplies, which caused him to stagger and shift his weight, momentarily loosening his grip on her. Nayeli stored each detail carefully, preparing for the moment when she could act. The sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert. The outlaws, tired and frustrated, argued loudly about the direction they should take. Nayeli's eyes scanned the terrain, noting rocks that could serve as leverage, branches that could be broken into small tools, and shadows that offered concealment. She realized that the landscape itself was an ally if she could only find the courage and strength to use it. That night they stopped near a dry riverbed. Nayeli was tied to a small tree, unable to move freely. The outlaws built a fire and ate the little food they had, their voices loud and careless. Nayeli observed them, noticing one man's knife lying near the fire. It was small but sharp, and if she could reach it, she might be able to cut the ropes. She imagined herself freeing her hands, running across the desert and disappearing into the hills. The thought filled her with determination, even as her body begged for rest. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by the sounds of the outlaws and the chill of the desert night. Nayeli shivered under the open sky, wrapping herself as best she could to conserve warmth. Her body ached, but her mind remained alert. She replayed her observations in her head, thinking of every weak spot, every careless movement, and every opportunity to escape. She knew that her chance might come soon, and she needed to be ready. By the 11th day, the journey had pushed Nayeli to her limits. Her muscles screamed with pain, her skin was sunburned and dusty, and her energy was nearly gone. Yet she remained defiant, refusing to let despair take hold. She focused on the small victories she had achieved, weakening the ropes, observing the outlaws' habits, and keeping her mind sharp despite exhaustion. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced her belief that she could survive. The outlaws, growing impatient and frustrated, began to argue more fiercely. Their greed and anger blinded them to the signs of danger around them. Nayeli watched as one man left his post to chase a rabbit, another fumbled with supplies, and yet another fell asleep near the fire. Each mistake brought her closer to the moment she had been waiting for. She whispered to herself, "Patience, wait for the right moment." As the day wore on, Nayeli's thoughts returned to her family. She imagined her mother searching for her, calling her name and feeling relief when she found her safe. She thought of her father and friends, picturing their faces and hearing their laughter. These memories were more than comforting. They were fuel for her courage. They reminded her that she was not alone, even in the harsh desert, and that her struggle had meaning. The sun began to set, casting the desert in shades of gold and red. Nayeli's heart raced as she realized that the outlaws were nearing a small town where they planned to sell her. She knew that the next hours would be critical. Every observation, every small act of preparation, could make the difference between freedom and captivity. She focused on her breathing, steadying herself and waiting for the perfect moment. As the night fell, the desert became a canvas of shadows and stars. Nayeli's body ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had survived 10 days of brutal travel, hunger, and fear. She had learned the patterns of her captors, observed every detail of the land, and prepared herself for the moment when she could act. Somewhere beyond the hills, she sensed that change was near, that someone, or something, would arrive to tip the scales. Her spirit, though weary, burned brighter than ever. The young Apache girl had endured more than most could imagine. She had been dragged across the desert, tied and helpless, yet she had not lost hope. Each day had tested her courage, strength, and patience, but she had survived. And as the night deepened, she whispered quietly to herself, "I will not be broken. I will survive. My journey is not over." Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the distant hills, the faint sound of hooves could be heard. A lone cowboy rode through the desert, unaware of the danger ahead, yet drawn by instinct and skill. His presence would soon change everything, bringing hope to Nayeli and confronting the outlaws who had underestimated her courage. The desert was quiet, almost eerily so, as the sun began to dip behind the distant hills. Nayeli's small frame was tired, her hands raw from the ropes, and her feet swollen from the long journey. The outlaws had grown careless, their attention divided between the stolen goods they carried and the girl they had tied to the tree. They did not notice the faint dust cloud rising in the distance, a subtle shimmer that only a careful observer would recognize as movement. Nayeli, exhausted but alert, sensed it first. Her sharp eyes, honed by 10 days of survival, caught the fleeting signs. The shadow of a rider against the hills, the soft rhythm of hooves on hard ground. The figure of a cowboy appeared over a distant ridge, moving steadily toward them. He rode with confidence, his horse sure-footed and alert, responding to every subtle command. The cowboy's eyes, sharp and watchful, scanned the desert for signs of life, danger, or trouble. He had traveled these lands many times before, learning to read the subtle marks left on the sand by humans and animals alike. Today, instinct guided him toward the cries, the scattered footprints, and the disturbances in the natural order of the desert. Naomi's heart raced at the sight of him. She dared not call out, fearing that the outlaws would notice and react violently. Still, hope surged through her exhausted body. After 10 days of fear, hunger, and despair, she sensed that salvation was near. Her eyes darted from the approaching cowboy to the outlaws, noting how they had tied her and how distracted they were in their greed and fatigue. Each detail mattered. She began to plan, silently, how she might seize the moment when help came. The outlaws argued loudly as the cowboy drew closer, unaware that their captive was watching and waiting. One complained about the heat, another about the weight of their loot, and a third about the difficulty of navigating the rocky terrain. Their voices carried across the desert, betraying their position to anyone paying attention. The cowboy slowed his horse as he approached, studying the scene carefully. He noticed the girl tied to the tree, her small form slumped but alert, and the careless stance of the men around her. Drawing closer, the cowboy assessed the situation quickly. He had faced danger before, but instinct and experience told him that this was a delicate matter. A direct charge could provoke the outlaws to harm the girl. Patience and strategy were required. He guided his horse along a hidden path, using the shadows and terrain to conceal his approach. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and calculated. Naomi's eyes followed him, her spirit lifting with each cautious step he took. The outlaws finally noticed the movement at the edge of the ridge. One shouted, pointing toward the cowboy, but his voice carried more surprise than authority. The men scrambled, pulling weapons from belts and holsters, but their coordination was poor, weakened by fatigue and greed. The cowboy, calm and composed, dismounted at a safe distance, keeping his hands free but ready. He observed their positions, noting their mistakes and preparing to act with precision. Naomi's pulse quickened. She could feel the possibility of escape so close, yet she remained cautious. She had endured 10 days of hardship and knew the importance of timing. One wrong move, one sudden scream, and the outlaws might lash out in anger. She adjusted her position slightly, testing the ropes silently and prepared to act at the first opportunity. The cowboy spoke, his voice steady and commanding, carrying across the desert. "Let the girl go. There's no need for this fight." His words were calm but firm, the kind of voice that demanded attention. The outlaws laughed nervously, unsure whether he was bluffing or serious. Their confidence, however, was a fragile thing, already weakened by exhaustion and the harsh journey. As the standoff continued, Naomi's mind worked rapidly. She noticed the man closest to her shifting his weight, leaving the rope around her wrist slack for a moment. Her fingers itched to take advantage, and she carefully rubbed them against the rough bark of the tree, trying to make the rope weak enough to slip free. The cowboy remained calm, drawing the attention of the outlaws and keeping them focused on him rather than her. One of the outlaws raised his weapon, stepping toward the cowboy with a sneer. The cowboy moved with practiced precision, placing himself between the man and Naomi while keeping a safe distance. His eyes were sharp, calculating each step, each movement of the men. He knew that any sudden action could escalate the danger, but he also knew that the girl's life depended on him acting decisively and wisely. Naomi felt a surge of courage. The cowboy's presence gave her strength, and the cracks in the outlaw's focus gave her a chance. Slowly, carefully, she twisted her hands, testing the frayed rope. It gave slightly under her effort. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she stayed focused, aware that one sudden movement could trigger disaster. The standoff continued, with tension thick in the air. The desert was silent except for the occasional shout and the soft rustle of the wind through sparse brush. Nayeli could feel her pulse in her ears, and yet she remained steady, drawing on every lesson learned during the 10 days of her ordeal. Patience, observation, and courage were her tools, just as they had been during the long journey. The cowboy took a careful step forward, his eyes never leaving the outlaws. He spoke again, this time with a tone that carried authority and quiet menace. "Leave now and no one gets hurt, but if you touch her, you will regret it." His words were clear, calm, and deliberate. The outlaws hesitated, unsure whether he spoke truthfully or bluffing. Their fear grew as they realized that the cowboy was not an ordinary traveler, but a man with skill, courage, and determination. Nayeli felt the rope around her hands loosen slightly. One of the men, distracted by the cowboy's words, adjusted his grip and unknowingly created the chance she had been waiting for. With a careful twist and a quiet movement, she slipped one hand free. Her heart raced, but she remained calm, knowing that haste could be dangerous. She worked silently to free the other hand, using the weakened rope and the rough bark of the tree to aid her. Finally, both hands were free. Nayeli's chest swelled with relief, but she did not move too quickly. She observed the cowboy's actions, noting that he had drawn the outlaws' attention entirely toward himself. The men were shouting and waving weapons, their coordination poor and their confidence shaken. She knew that this was the moment to act, but she also knew she needed to do so carefully. With a deep breath, Nayeli moved slowly, quietly, and deliberately. She stepped behind the nearest rocks, keeping herself hidden from the outlaws' line of sight. Her small body was light and agile, making her almost invisible in the shadows of the desert. She waited, counting the beats of her heart, and then made her move toward the cowboy, the promise of freedom so close that she could almost feel it. The cowboy noticed her movement and gave a subtle nod, acknowledging her courage and determination. He moved slightly to cover her, keeping the outlaws focused on him while she advanced. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, one built on trust and the shared goal of rescuing her from the cruel hands of the outlaws. The outlaws, now fully aware of the situation, reacted with panic. They shouted and swung their weapons wildly, but their movements were disorganized, uncoordinated, and slow. The cowboy moved with precision, using his experience to deflect attacks and protect Nayeli. She remained calm, following his lead and prepared to run when the moment was right. Finally, the chance came. One of the men stumbled over a rock, losing his balance and dropping his weapon. Nayeli seized the opportunity, sprinting toward the cowboy with all the strength she had left. The outlaws, disoriented and panicked, could not stop her. The cowboy intercepted the closest threats, using skill and speed to neutralize danger. In a matter of moments, Nayeli was free, standing beside her rescuer in the desert twilight. The outlaws, seeing their plan collapse, fled into the hills, leaving behind their supplies and their captive. Nayeli stood there trembling from exhaustion but filled with relief and gratitude. The cowboy looked at her, a calm but approving expression on his face. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "You're safe." Nayeli's eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of survival. She had endured 10 days of unimaginable hardship, yet she had remained strong, clever, and courageous. Now, standing beside the cowboy who had come at just the right moment, she finally felt a sense of hope and security. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Nayeli took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air on her face. She looked at the cowboy, silently thanking him for his bravery and skill. Together, they began the journey toward safety, leaving behind the dangers of the desert and the cruel outlaws. Nayeli's heart was lighter now, her spirit stronger, and her hope for the future brighter than it had been in days. The night settled over the desert, calm and quiet, as the two travelers moved through the shadows. Naomi's mind was filled with gratitude, relief, and the knowledge that she had survived against incredible odds. The journey was not yet over, but she had taken the first step toward freedom, guided by courage, intelligence, and the unexpected help of a stranger who had appeared just in time. The desert night was calm, but the air was still filled with tension. Naomi stood beside the cowboy, her hands now free, her heart pounding with relief and lingering fear. The outlaws had fled into the hills, but she knew they were dangerous and could return if given the chance. The cowboy's presence gave her courage, and his calm demeanor reassured her that she was no longer alone. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on her sunburned skin, and tried to steady her thoughts. The cowboy assessed the situation carefully. He knew the outlaws might regroup or attempt to ambush them if they were careless. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning the surrounding desert for any signs of movement. The terrain was rugged, and the shadows of rocks and hills created places for the men to hide. He moved cautiously, signaling to Naomi to stay close and quiet. Her small hand slipped into his, and she felt a wave of safety she hadn't known in days. Slowly, they began to move toward the distant settlement that Naomi's mind had imagined countless times over the past 10 days. The journey was not easy. Her body ached from the long ordeal. Her feet were still blistered, her arms sore, and her energy low, but her spirit was strong. Every step she took was filled with determination, fueled by hope and the knowledge that she was moving toward freedom. As they traveled, the cowboy spoke softly, asking questions about her journey. Naomi shared details about the outlaws' behavior, the places they had passed, and her small efforts to observe and survive. The cowboy listened intently, nodding in understanding. He praised her courage and intelligence, reminding her that her strength had helped ensure her survival. Naomi felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of pride mixed with relief. She had endured 10 days of fear, hunger, and pain, and now her courage was recognized and respected. Hours passed as they navigated the desert under the moonlight. The outlaws had disappeared from sight, but the cowboy remained vigilant, constantly scanning for danger. Naomi, though exhausted, kept her senses alert. She had learned over the past days to notice even the smallest details: the sound of shifting rocks, the rustle of leaves, the faint smell of smoke or animals. Every sense was heightened, sharpened by the need to survive. At the edge of the settlement, lights flickered in the distance. Naomi's heart leapt at the sight. She recognized the familiar shapes of buildings and fences, the small comforts of home-like structures, and the promise of safety. The cowboy slowed his pace, signaling her to do the same. They approached carefully, knowing that sudden movement could startle anyone or draw unwanted attention. When they reached the first huts, the cowboy called out quietly, ensuring that their arrival would not cause panic. Villagers emerged cautiously, seeing the exhausted girl and the calm, confident cowboy. Recognition and relief spread across their faces as they realized that Naomi had survived. Mothers held their children close, and men of the village came forward, eager to hear what had happened. Naomi's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for her family, and she felt a surge of emotion when she saw her mother rushing toward her. Her mother's face was filled with tears and relief as she threw herself toward Naomi, embracing her tightly. Naomi's own tears flowed freely as she hugged her mother back, feeling the warmth and love she had longed for over the past 10 days. Her father arrived shortly after, his face a mix of worry and relief, and he knelt to embrace his daughter. Naomi's heart swelled with gratitude, the long journey of fear and endurance finally culminating in the comfort of her family's love. The villagers listened intently as Naomi recounted her story. She described the outlaws, the journey through the harsh desert, and the moments of fear and hope she had experienced. The cowboy stood silently nearby, nodding occasionally, letting her tell the story in her own words. The villagers were amazed by her courage and resilience, realizing that she had endured far more than anyone could imagine. They praised her bravery and the wisdom she had shown in observing and surviving. Meanwhile, the cowboy quietly ensured that the outlaws would not return to harm anyone. He had noted their tracks, hidden weapons, and possible hideouts. Early the next morning, he rode back into the hills to confront the men, not with anger but with justice. He approached them cautiously, using his experience and skill to prevent them from causing further harm. When he found them, he confronted them directly, disarming them and leaving them with no choice but to retreat from the territory entirely. His calm authority and precision ensured that the village would be safe from their cruelty. Back in the village, Nayeli began to regain her strength. Her mother tended to her wounds, cleaning her skin and wrapping her hands and feet. Her father brought food and water, encouraging her to eat slowly and drink carefully. The villagers rallied around her, offering comfort, blankets, and warm meals. Nayeli's heart was filled with gratitude for their kindness, and she began to feel the strength returning to her body. In the following days, life slowly returned to normal. The village rebuilt what had been damaged, and the story of Nayeli's courage spread among the people. She became a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and bravery. Children listened eagerly to her recounting of the journey, not the fear and pain, but the hope, observation, and determination that had allowed her to survive. Elders praised her spirit, noting that even in the most challenging situations, courage and wisdom could triumph. Nayeli herself learned many lessons from the ordeal. She realized that strength was not just physical, but also mental and emotional. Patience, observation, and careful planning could be as powerful as any weapon. She understood the value of hope, even in the darkest times, and the importance of courage in facing danger. And above all, she discovered that human kindness, the cowboy's timely arrival, the villagers' care, and her family's love, could transform despair into relief and survival into freedom. The cowboy remained for a few days, ensuring the village's safety and helping to rebuild some of the small damages caused by the outlaws. He taught some of the villagers basic survival skills and strategies for observing and avoiding danger, sharing his experience without arrogance. Nayeli watched him with admiration, realizing that courage and kindness often came together in people who chose to act for the benefit of others. When it was time for the cowboy to leave, Nayeli felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived unimaginable hardship, and he had played a key role in her rescue. She waved as he rode off into the horizon, knowing that his appearance had changed her life forever. She also knew that her own courage and perseverance had been equally important, shaping her survival and eventual freedom. In the months that followed, Nayeli continued to grow stronger. She helped her family with daily tasks, shared her experiences to educate the younger children, and remained alert to the lessons the desert had taught her. She understood the fragility of life, the importance of observation, and the power of hope. Her story became part of the village's history, a tale of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Looking back on her ordeal, Nayeli realized that the journey had tested every part of her, body, mind, and heart. Yet she had endured, survived, and emerged stronger. The desert, the outlaws, and the long days of struggle had left marks on her, but they had also shown her the depth of her own strength. And in the comfort of her family, the protection of her village, and the kindness of a stranger, she found the peace and safety that had seemed so distant during those long 10 days. As the sun set over the village one evening, Nayeli stood quietly, watching the orange and purple sky. She felt a sense of calm, knowing that she had survived the worst and had grown stronger because of it. Her hands, once bound and raw, now rested freely at her sides. Her feet, once blistered and sore, carried her with renewed strength. And her heart, once heavy with fear, was filled with hope, courage, and the enduring knowledge that she could face whatever challenges life might bring. The desert behind her had tested her in every way imaginable, but it had not broken her spirit. Nayeli had endured 10 days of fear, hunger, and danger, and emerged with her courage intact. The cowboys' timely arrival had brought rescue, but her own intelligence, patience, and resilience had ensured that she survived. In the end, Nayeli returned to her family, her village, and her life, forever changed, yet stronger and wiser than before. And so the young Apache girl, once captured and dragged across the desert, found freedom, safety, and the love of her family once more. Her story became a testament to the power of hope, the strength of the human spirit, and the courage that can shine even in the darkest moments. Nayeli had survived, not just because of others, but because of herself, and that truth would remain with her forever.